Hello, my name is Joe van Wyk and welcome to my channel. You're watching Screenplay Essentials and this is episode 1 part 3. In this episode we'll be talking about some writing tips to help you create an effective protagonist. Originally I had this content connected with part 2, but it was quite a long episode, so I decided to split it in half. So we'll be just continuing the conversation from part 2, creating a protagonist that is your main character. And this episode will explore some components that are the basics of the basics to make you aware, especially if you're a young filmmaker or a young screenwriter watching this series, just to make yourself aware of understanding the very important components, what makes an effective protagonist succeed in your own story. Whatever your story is, whatever your unique premise that you're writing, unique character that you're writing, that you can implement these components that I'll be discussing to help elevate the story and write a compelling story for your audience. Now, writing an effective protagonist can be a difficult thing to do. There's a couple of ways to do it, and I recently just found a website that beautifully highlights some tips that you can implement that I'll share with you. It all comes from Janice Hardy. I'll put the links in the description as well, but she beautifully highlights a few things that you can take in account when trying to achieve or trying to create an effective protagonist for your own story. The first one is to focus your protagonist, focus your perspective in how you tell the story. Objectively, you would do things in an objective manner, but when writing subjectively, it means you put the audience into the main character's eyes. It's very important to have a strong point of view, and we, the audience, experience what the main character experienced, and we go with them on that journey through their eyes in a subjective manner. Naturally, you jump into the eyes of the antagonist, but for a protagonist telling the story, it's about their experiences and how they make the plans and how they move the story forward. Focus your character, you focus the audience, you focus the central conflict, and you focus that perspective is a very important thing to remember in achieving that effective protagonist. So make sure that the protagonist has a problem, whether it's the world conflict or the external conflict or the internal conflict or whatever is shackling them down or that forces them to try and solve their issues and their problems. Make sure that that's the protagonist that you're dealing with. If they don't have the problem that needs solving, then the story isn't really about them, that it's their problem that they're trying to solve and they're the ones who can solve the ultimate crisis or the problem. Your audience will be latched onto that character and they will root for them. They can even despise them if they're an immoral protagonist. The next one, the ability to act. This is very, very important when you have a protagonist proactively moving the plot along, because it's often how they try to solve their crisis. Very, very important. If you remember the through line, it's literally the second question that you should ask. The protagonist is trying to achieve something with their super objective. How do they move the plot along? They're the ones who make up the ideas, make up the plans, do execute the plans, even if it fails, especially if it fails, because we as humans in real life, we learn from our mistakes, and if we see a protagonist making mistakes, we enjoy that growth with them, and it's a beautiful way of your audience latching on, and they need to be the ones who are proactively figuring things out. Even if your protagonist doesn't know what they want in their super objective, their ultimate goal, you need to show them proactively trying to figure out what they are trying to achieve at the end of the film. The iconic and famous Die Hard movie is a great example of the ability to act, where this police officer is trapped with all the other people in this building while the villain antagonist takes over, and he has the ability to act not because he's a superhero, but because he's putting plans together, figuring things out, how to make contact with the outside police. He's figuring out how to stop the bad guys. He's not some trained Navy SEAL. He's just an ordinary cop. It would make completely no sense if the main character was some sort of accountant and he's got all these magical abilities. It's basically just a white collar worker that as a profession, as a police officer, and he has the ability to act and make sure that he can at least provide opposition for the hostage takers. Then something to lose or something to gain. It's a very important dynamic when you have a protagonist who loses something that's very dear to them, that can propel them on that journey of trying to get revenge or try to solve their crisis in that sense. They can also have to sacrifice something that they don't want to in order to get something else that they desire or that is part of their super objective. And even if the going gets tough and they want to quit, and like most of us as human beings, when the struggle is too much, we would rather opt out. But that's not story. Story is a character that defies the odds, and they pick themselves up after falling in the bottom of despair and of no return. They find a way to get themselves up. They see the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's very important to remind them to keep on going. And often is the case, how they achieve their super objective is often by some sort of sacrifice. If you think about Frodo fails his quest to throw the ring to the fire. Gollum bites off his finger, but Frodo actually loses his humanity in that sense because he fails the quest, he fails the fellowship of the ring, and it's up to Sam to rescue him when he falls down after Gollum pulls him down. It may not be a sacrifice at all, it can be simply a reward after experiencing this massive ordeal of horror that they experience in Act 2, an inciting incident, the midpoint, and the final climax scene. They experience a lot of difficulty, and you then reward them at the end of the film by having to go through all of that stuff. An effective protagonist experience some sort of character arc, whether it's a growth arc where they are innocent in the beginning or naive in the beginning, and they grow throughout the changes that occurs in that story and how they grow with the experiences, or they enter the story with a certain belief system, and through the events and through them moving through the act 2, the extraordinary world, and into the interpersonal world that completely changes them. And even the decline arc, when a character either rise or fall or experiences a tragedy in how they decline by the choices they make, and they make bad choices after bad choices after bad choices, and they end up being a tragedy. Whatever the case might be, that sort of character arcs are extremely important in implementing that into your protagonist. Obviously, the exception to the rule is if you've got a flat character like the persona protagonist that is steadfast in their belief system and they believe in their skills and their wits to win the conflict, then that's an exception. But generally, an effective protagonist is one that has room for change and growth. This sort of character development is extremely important in any given film, short film, TV series or trilogy, to show the character how they are in the beginning in the ordinary world, how they are at the end of the film due to the growth or the changes that they undertake, and how the audience identify with this protagonist and they are being entertained by a compelling story that shows a lot of dynamic in their being a round character or a flat character, whether it's a positive flat character or a negative flat character. Then very importantly, an effective protagonist have interesting flaws. A perfect human being is very boring generally and usually equates to reality TV. That differentiates reality TV from fictional works or fictional writing, because in fiction we've got characters that have flaws, and your audience will always quickly identify and resonate with a protagonist that they can see they've got experience of flaw going forward into the narrative of the story, trying to get over the hurdles and the oppositions. And the best type of flaws are not random ones. They are often by design handpicked to make logical sense in the plot, the character arc, that gives opportunities for the protagonist to grow and to change. And these flaws can often help them realize what they actually need to overcome. These flaws are often the answer that the character needs to obtain at the end, or when they change and they learn that, okay, I need to actually overcome this to defeat the antagonist or to fix the world problem. All their character flaws are exactly the thing that cause the problem, cause the conflict, the world problem, the things that they need to fix. Their guilt is of such a way that they need to fix their problems and fix everyone's problems because of what they've done. Maybe they are aware of this flaw and they are trying actively to fix it, or they can learn from this flaw as if it's an answer to something that they need at the end of Act 2. These flaws can not only just cripple them, but they can genuinely learn from them as if it's opportunities for them to generally grow. And you can ask your protagonist these types of questions. Maybe one of these questions can help the very thing that you're struggling with, and you can implement that effectively in your story. An effective protagonist that has at least one of the 4 components of the Golden Diamond that I've discussed in the previous series, something that they fear, something that they desire, something that makes them a likable protagonist, and something that creates empathy that the audience can latch on. Empathy is of utmost importance. If you don't have empathy, your audience can't understand what the character is going through, and it's very important to implement that into the story. They may have a really compelling quality or skill or talent that adds value to the likability feature, but obviously if you have an immoral protagonist, then the lack of empathy is not present in the story, but you can show the audience their choices and their motivations to help understand what they're doing, and the audience may even root for them, even if they're the bad guys. They may even be on their side despite the good guys being the antagonists. An effective protagonist that are seen making choices is very important, whether they find themselves in the middle of the story or near the end in a fork road where they have to go left or right, and those choices can result into sacrifices, or whether it's small choices or bad choices or big choices. Having no choices is problematic, and the story often falls flat, especially if you have a passive protagonist that doesn't make any choices. Those things are definitely a red flag. Show the character deciding and thinking of ideas and plans and making the choices that implement them in the proactive moving the plot forward. Or do they weigh the consequences of the choice making? And even if they screw up, you can show them trying to remedy the situation or fix the bad choice making in their forward momentum, and that's still a compelling story to watch. An effective protagonist is as good as an effective antagonist standing against them, whether it's a villain or antagonist, or the conflict that they're facing, whether it's a world problem, society, or man versus machine, or whatever the conflict trope that they can find themselves in. It's very important to show that conflict is extremely credible and they are as good as the opposing force. If the opposing force is very weak, the protagonist can easily walk around them or circumvent them, and there's no story. But if you have a strong antagonist, your protagonist will be an effective one to show to the audience how they deal with that conflict, overcoming those obstacles. And it's also a brilliant way to demonstrate their resilience, the tug of war between the protagonist and the antagonist, or the villain. It's a way to show the character perseverance throughout the obstacles that's thrown in their way. And you need to focus the conflict as well, because if the antagonist wants something different than the protagonist, you're telling 2 different stories. It's very important to align those goals, those super objectives from the antagonist side as well with the protagonist, so that you're telling one complete story. And often writers might easily undervalue the antagonist or undervalue the protagonist. They can give a lot of cool things and great things and prop up the antagonist, but they leave the protagonist bare bone hanging dry, and it can be very unrelatable to the audience. It's definitely a balancing act between creating an effective protagonist with an effective antagonist that is as good as they can be. The movie Heat is a beautiful case study of a protagonist versus an antagonist, and vice versa. There's a iconic scene in the movie that both the antagonist and the protagonist sits down in a diner and they discuss what their super objectives are and their motivations. It's a beautiful case study of how to write an effective protagonist and an effective antagonist. Sometimes an effective protagonist is one that has a secret. It can be a dark secret or a dirty little secret, or just a secret that they kept away from the secondaries that can influence the plot severely if it's found out. We've all seen this in a lot of movies and TV series, especially comedies, when a character has a dirty little secret, and when the truth comes out, all hell breaks loose and it all spirals out of control, and they are then trying to put the pieces back together. And this sort of thing can often destroy relationships, especially in the romance genre, when a character is obsessed about another character, but there's a secret that completely splits them apart, and now the character needs to find a way to get back in the good graces of the object of their desire. Generally, the recipe for creating suspense or mystery has to do with the secret, that if you show the audience the secret, you create suspense, because then it's suspense of when the other characters eventually get wind of it or find out the truth and how they would react. And the recipe for mystery is when the writer keeps the secret away from the audience. And sometimes even the main character, then the audience and the main character gradually learns the truth. And sometimes the mixture between suspense and mystery, when neither the audience knows the secret or the main character knows the secret, or the secondary characters knows the secret, no one knows the secret, and the atmosphere builds up and builds up, like in the iconic Rosemary's Baby, where you don't know what's going on, but there's this sense of mystery and suspense hanging in the air until you eventually realize, oh, this is actually where the story is going, and it's quite a dark ending. Then lastly, an effective protagonist has interesting social traits, often positive ones that outweigh the negative ones. It's good to have a negative trait with the protagonist, but it's a really good idea to have the positive traits outweigh the negative ones. Otherwise, you create a very dislikable protagonist. And it's very important to notice this thing when you write your flaws and your things that you develop into your story, that you make sure that your protagonists still have a few positive traits, even with the reverse of a anti-hero or a immoral protagonist. With the case of Nightcrawler, you can see the character is a very friendly character, but he's got ulterior, darker motives, but he still puts on a mask of a friendly, inviting type of personality. Especially when a protagonist invokes trust and loyalty, and they're reliable type of personality, they tell the truth. Those sort of things resonates with the audience on a far greater level than a protagonist who keeps lying. It might be fun to watch, might be contribute to the likability factor, that the character tells lies and gets away with it. But the stronger, effective protagonist is one that is generally one who speaks the truth and is loyal and trustworthy. And you can see why the secondary characters latch on and wants to help the protagonist, wants to follow them in their journey. A great way also is to show the protagonist how they view other characters and how other characters view the protagonist is of utmost importance, to show that in the story as well, in the dynamics between the protagonist, the primary characters and the secondary characters, and how they view each other, and especially when other people have conflict, how the protagonist can intervene with that conflict. And it's a beautiful way of showcasing their personalities and showcasing how they deal with conflict, how they get over hurdles and obstacles and try to solve their world problem, solve their crisis in whichever way possible. Now, when writing scene, there's a general philosophy with your main character and protagonist moving through these scenes that you should always keep in mind or have at the back of your head, is that number one, what are the intentions of your protagonist throughout a scene? What are they trying to obtain through that scene? What is the scene about? Who's got the perspective in that scene? Who's leading that scene? And if it switches between characters, someone may lead the scene somehow, and then it can completely switch through a power dynamic. And then who's bringing the conflict to the table? There needs to be obstacles. If there's no conflict in the scene, then the scenes are flat and dry and doesn't move the story forward. And which brings me to the last point, that the scenes need to move the story forward. You need to have characters that proactively move the story forward. Otherwise, you omit those scenes, and make sure that you always have this sort of mantra at the back of your head when you think of your stories, when you're writing your stories, that if there's no conflict in the scenes, you don't have drama. And what are the intentions and the obstacles in the scenes that are extremely important to the storytelling or the overall narrative arc. There's a couple of things that Janice Hardy likes to highlight that's also very important to think of, is that is your protagonist in any sort of danger in the scene? The whole life and death situation can be utilized in the urgency in moving the plot forward. Can your protagonist learn something new? Maybe they learn a new secret, maybe they reveal a secret, or maybe someone exposes them. Maybe someone is penetrating their armor and they are forced to expose themselves in a psychological manner that's very unhealthy or troublesome for that character at that moment. And as I've just mentioned, the conflict. Who are they in conflict with? Are they in conflict with someone or something, or even with themselves? Conflict drives story. Conflict, without no conflict, there's no drama, there's no story. So it's very important to always remember that. And remember, don't go easy on your protagonist. Put obstacles in their way, put challenges, give them challenges to overcome and to succeed. If they require tools, take those tools away from them, allow them to think outside the box. Those certain things helps make the story interesting, and it helps develop their character when they need to think outside the box. Maybe, for example, they accidentally throw diesel into the car and it messes up the car, obviously, and they are forced to steal a bike or a bicycle, and it compromises their belief system or their morality, and it forces them to steal something, steal a bike, in order to get on the road and get to the destination or the place that they need to be. Can your protagonist make any choices that are extremely vital to the story at hand and moving the plot forward? And whether they're stuck in a fork road and they have to turn left or they have to turn right, or just a decision between taking advice or giving advice and weighing the consequences. And by saying this, resist giving them random choices like choosing between red and blue. Those things doesn't matter. Give them choices that are specifically designed as an importance to the overall narrative, and them trying to reach their super objective. Whether they fail or they learn from their mistakes, give them choices in that regard. And can your protagonist fail at something that is like an obstacle in their path in that scene? Maybe they're trying to get petrol in the car, but they unfortunately throw diesel into the car instead of petrol. Now the problem is even bigger, because now they don't have a car to get to their destination, as a silly example. There are thousands of things that your protagonist can fail at, as long as it makes credible sense and not just random things, that it makes sense to the overall want of that scene, what the character is trying to obtain in that scene, their intentions, and the obstacles. If they fail at the obstacles, how do they learn moving onwards to the next scene? And maybe especially with the cause and effect pattern, that something happens and the effect of it is of a extremity that they need to overcome in order to reach the next point. A great way of thinking of it is that the scenes in a story or a film is like cinder blocks of information. Once you start to see that scenes are informations or blocks of information, you can move that informations around. And especially in the act or whichever act you're busy with. But when that bulk of information is not important, you can take it out and you can supplant it with a block of information that is important. Remember, there's so many things that you can show to the audience of that character's life, of the protagonist's life. But what is important, you're trying to condense story as much as possible in a feature film. Obviously, TV series, you have the freedom to expand a lot of things, but in a feature film, you need to compress and condense a lot of things. And if that block of information is not important, then take it out, rather replace it with another block of information that is relevant to the story and the character trying to proactively move the story forward towards a super objective. Now, there are reasons why characters fail and why your protagonist ought to fail in some way or another. It's a experience through that failures and hardships that makes it real, makes them human, it makes them relatable, because usually what happens with perfect characters, they come across to the audience as unrelatable, and it can often be a negative trait when you see a character that's too perfect, that's almost as if they are playing a part or putting a mask on, and they are trying to deceive or trying to boast about themselves. Those things can easily relate to a negative response from the audience, whereas opposed to a character that is seen going through hardships and fail. It makes them real, it makes them human, and very relatable to the audience. The next one is it makes the stakes real. When you raise the stakes about a life and death situation where the character face the urgency in them trying to obtain whatever they need to obtain, and by raising the stakes in the conflict, they understand that they've got a lot to lose when they don't have urgency to obtain what they need to obtain and move the plot forward. Having characters fail also makes things interesting to watch. When the audience sees that your character is this perfect human being, they don't make mistakes, they've got plot armor 5,000 and the bullets bounce off them, it's not very engaging and it can be very boring, and it's a very distasteful type of storytelling. This is why I'm not a big fan of the James Bond series, because James Bond is this perfect human being that bullets literally bounce off. The enemies are throwing a hand grenade at him and he kicks the hand grenades back at them. It's like a fighting machine with a big chunk of armor, especially when Hollywood loves to do a Mary Sue that is this perfect woman, this perfect female figure. They cannot do mistakes, they are flawless, they are this shining light of perfection. Those things can really alienate the audience, and it's very jarring to watch. Speaking as a writer myself, it can be difficult to write an imperfect character, making bad choices, saying bad things, or alienating their friends or their teammates. Those things can be difficult to write because we tend to make always the protagonist the perfect human being, but it's important that you realize that with perfection there's problems, and creating an imperfect protagonist gives you the opportunities for growth and change, and there's room for them to learn from their mistakes. And if characters never fail, it removes a lot out of the mystery of the storytelling, because the audience often need to question what's happening next. If they know the characters aren't failing, then they can easily predict what's happening next. And conflict is not just about the protagonist versus the antagonist or the world crisis, the world problem, but also in the moment, in the situation of that scene, the character can experience conflict with the secondaries, and it can boil things up with tension, and it can make things unpleasant. It can diverge paths from one another, and it can just be a way of misunderstanding one another with communication. The very aspect of failure is also a beautiful process in the change arc, because when a character has a certain belief system that they carry from the ordinary world, and something happens, the inciting incident that propels them into the extraordinary world of Act 2, they may be testing those belief systems, and the data coming back to them is of negative response in how they realize that what they've been taught or what they know is actually wrong, and they are forced to reconcile, forced to realize what they need to learn in order to change and to win the combat or the competition, or to solve their world crisis or achieve their super objective that they so desired. It makes things very, very personal. Remember, emotion is a byproduct from the things that are happening. When your character fails, they are stricken with guilt or remorse, or they feel anxiety or doubt or self-loathing, or they may even experience some sort of depression that forces them to re-evaluate their choices, their decisions, and think of a different plan or different way to solve it in the process. And the byproduct of emotion is something that the audience experience, and the audience loves that sort of thing because they can root for them, they can empathize with them, and making things personal by their failures is a way how you connect with your audience on a personal level. And speaking of emotion, when you're writing an effective protagonist, think of ways to take advantage emotionally of that character, prey on their fears and their weaknesses, manipulate the situations that is against them, raise the tension to make things harder for them trying to figure things out, or when they know what to do to solve their problem, make it harder for them to achieve that and create those obstacles in that way. And nothing's more nerve-wracking than putting the external conflict and the internal conflict at odds there. The external world and the internal world they need to maybe sacrifice one to get the other. Think of ways to make your protagonist's life hell, because if it's rainbow and sunshine and beautiful skies, then that sort of thing is very boring to watch. Here's a couple of tips from Janice that helps you maybe screw up the decisions of your protagonist. For example, they may act too impulsive, they snap to judgment, they make decisions under pressure, they can overthink things, they can overanalyze things, they may have a mindset that they think they know it all and they don't ask for advice, and they don't make alternative plans, and they don't weigh the consequences of their choices that they make. Another fun way to do this is to withhold information away from the protagonist, lie to them so that they make mistakes, and then reveal the truth for them when they suffer the most, so that they can learn. And even if secondaries help your protagonist, you need to ask, why are they helping? Is there ulterior motives to helping the protagonist? Are they benefiting from something, or are they trying to deceive the protagonist? Do they experience the wound in present time, or was the wound in their backstory, and who they are now in the present time is the effect of that wound? And does that wound come back in a bigger form and forces the protagonist to face their wound, ripping off the bandage, and try to change or grow and become a better character at the end of the day? And also, don't forget about plans and payoffs. When you plan certain information in the beginning of the story that gets later a payoff at the end, that's very rewarding to the audience to watch. And they can see when things are forced into the story that doesn't have a foreshadowing or a plan that has been implemented in the beginning. Plan things in the beginning that acts as a foreshadow, that helps them reveal certain information or a technique or something that gets revealed at the end of the story that makes sense, and it brings everything to light, and it makes a credible, compelling story to watch. And show ways to make them committed to their super objective, that they don't just give up. Think of ways to remind them about the stakes, remind them about what they're trying to achieve. And even if there's a moment where they feel like they need to give up, have a secondary character or have a certain conflict introduced into that situation that pulls them up again and reminds them to be committed to the cause and the urgency to achieve what they need to achieve. Even if your character is experiencing the lowest of the low, in the darkest corner or the bottom of the pit, they want to give up and throw in the towel, make them realize, remind them that they need to pick themselves up, they need to prove themselves to committed in their cause and their belief system, so that the story that just doesn't die. Because if you allow that story to die there, then why are you telling that story to the audience? There must be a reason why the audience is watching this character in this particular point in time, in this moment of their lives, trying to obtain their super objective. And if you show them giving up and they're not committed to what they're trying to do, it's problematic to watch, and people will switch away or switch off. And force your protagonist to be curious and question everything, so that they try to make sense of the world around them and the other characters and the conflict. And when you do that, the audience also gets looped into the picture. They also, okay, I can see the character is trying to figure things out. I can also figure things out with the character, and we like to be involved into those type of stories. This natural curiosity, by questioning everything, can open a lot of options or opportunities for your protagonist to grow. It can even provide branching with a plot and the narrative, so that you can find alternative ways to reach the ending or the climax scene of the film, and different ways of how you can bring your character to its final completion. So there's a couple of reasons why your protagonist may not move the plot forward, and those are red flags that you need to be aware of. Have a look at episode 1 in series 1, where I spoke about some tips that you can implement to make sure that your protagonist is proactive. The proactivity is of utmost importance. But what I like to do just to discuss here is the protagonists that often overthink things. They overthink their problems and they don't do anything about it, or they deliberate on things that they talk and they talk and they talk, and they can't make a choice. They're very indecisive, or they internalize things, and you should always be wary about that, because you're not writing a novel. Characters who internalize things, unless you're using a voiceover narration, or you're showing some surreal moment that is inside their heads, or if you've got a protagonist that thinks too little and they don't think about the stakes that are involved or the stuff that they can lose, if they don't act with urgency towards their super objective, or if they don't understand the context in their choice-making decisions. And even if secondary characters make choices for them, those things can be problematic for the protagonist in trying to move the plot forward. I've also discussed in episode 1 of series 1 the red flags that you should always avoid when creating main character protagonists, is to avoid the passive main character protagonist, because they shy away from conflict. They don't want to do anything to help themselves. They don't want to change. They don't want to grow. They are recluse to the world. They separate themselves from everyone else, and they don't drive the story, and it can be very boring to watch. And also avoid the reactive main character protagonist that is reacting to someone else's story that they're not partaking. Especially when you're writing subjectively and you have a protagonist that is not involved in the conflict, they're reacting to someone else and they're going down the stream like a fish down the stream. Remember, there's a difference between a protagonist that's reacting to things that happens to them, and they make the choices and they make the plans to figure things out and to get the plot moving towards a super objective, as opposed to a reactive protagonist that doesn't do any of those things and let other people solve their problems. And lastly, avoid the active main character protagonist, because they do activity for the sake of activity and not governed by motivation. Proactive motivation is things that the protagonists do, activities that they do towards their super objective. They are putting plans in place and they're going through obstacles, trying to achieve their super objective. But if you have a character that's just doing activities to keep themselves busy on the screen, because you've got a scene with a lot of dialogue and you don't know what to do with the dialogue, and you just put a random activity in a scene that doesn't make sense, try to avoid all those things. Those things are often called shoe ladder scenes, when a character is moving from A to B, B to A to B, and there's no reason for them doing that, or them not moving the plot forward. For example, having a character washing their dog instead of getting the petrol for the car to get the car on the road towards their super objective. Why are you showing me the character is washing the dog? I know you might say, oh, but I'm trying to build a beautiful moment between the dog and the owner. Instead of trapping the audience in that scene with them washing the dog, rather get the petrol in the car and get the car on the road towards their holiday destination, and have the dog inside the car, in which they have a beautiful moment, or giving the dog a treat or something. Always think about proactively moving the plot forward. Don't think about things that create activity to make a beautiful moment on screen. You're not telling reality TV, you're writing fictional story, and the fictional story needs a furnace. It needs a fuel for the fire. You need to get the plot moving. Cut to the chase, cut to the chase. It's a very popular saying in filmmaking. Cut to the chase, get things moving, condense things. Remember about the information cinder blocks. If that block of information is not important, take it out. In conclusion, I hope all of this information doesn't overburden you or overwhelm you as a young filmmaker or young screenwriter watching this series. It's just my way of presenting all of the information to you so that you can pause and write things down, or come back later to the time codes if there's something that you forgot or something that you remembered that I spoke about that can help you in your own story. Remember, you don't have to stress about learning all of these things out of your head. It's just a way of making yourself aware, and your subconscious mind will often take over when you write your own story, when you write your own unique premise, creating your own unique protagonist, that you will think of things of like, oh, I need to make this character proactive, or I need to think about the flaw, or I need to work on the empathy or the likability, or there are things that that are too convenient in the story and the plot. I should remove and take away. I should make the character more proactive and make them think of solutions and give them choices and all of that stuff, so that you can doctor yourself in writing the scripts. And by making yourself aware of all of these things, you can create a first draft shooting draft, and with that means that there's no problems with your protagonist in the first draft when you make yourself aware of all of these things that can help contribute to the effectiveness of your protagonist. And obviously you'll go to a second draft and a third draft to finalize it, but to aim for a first draft shooting draft, you need to be aware of the problems that exist and the pitfalls and the red flags that you should avoid, and you can fully implement these story advice techniques to help create an effective protagonist in your own unique story. Make sure that you watch Series 1, Episode 1 to 6. It's very important to understand that character development process as well, especially Episode 6 with the conflict, to fully understand the conflict, because there's a lot of things about the external plot and the internal plot that is rooted in conflict, the external conflict and the internal conflict that is definitely surrounds your protagonist. In the next episode, part 4, I'll be discussing the amoral protagonist. I decided to make a sole episode dedicated on the amoral protagonist, the villain protagonist, because there's a couple of things that I need to discuss there, and just a way of creating an effective protagonist. I myself often write morally good protagonists that are lawfully good or neutral good or chaotic good, where we'll explore the amoral protagonist together and maybe even do a case study. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe, and I see you in the next episode.